All right, today we're jumping into a story that's, well, it's complicated, and it's often misunderstood. We're talking about Puerto Rico. We're going to break down its history, its really unique relationship with the United States, and what all of that means for the millions of American citizens who call the island home. Let's just start with one number, 43.5%. That right there is the poverty rate in Puerto Rico. Now, to give you some perspective, the poorest state in the U.S., Mississippi, has a poverty rate less than half of that. So you gotta ask, how did a part of the wealthiest nation on Earth end up here? Well, the answer is a long one, over a century in the making. So to really get what's happening now, we have to go back. We need to start at a really pivotal moment in the past. We're heading back to the very end of the 19th century, a time when Puerto Rico's entire destiny was handed from one empire to another. I mean, just look at how fast this all happened. In 1897, after being under Spanish rule for centuries, Puerto Rico finally gets a charter of autonomy, a little bit of self-government. But just a few months later, boom, July 1898, the U.S. invades during the Spanish-American War. By December, the ink is dry on the Treaty of Paris, and just like that, Puerto Rico is handed over to the United States. That brief taste of autonomy, poof, gone, replaced by this totally new and very uncertain relationship. And that created this fundamental question, one the U.S. really hadn't faced before. What do you do with a territory that's full of people? A territory you own, but you don't really see as a future state? This question, this puzzle, would lead to a really unique and frankly controversial legal status. So in this next section, let's unpack the legal framework the U.S. came up with for Puerto Rico. It's a framework that, believe it or not, still defines the island to this day and is really at the heart of this whole story. The answer they came up with was this term, unincorporated territory. Now, this phrase isn't in the Constitution. It was basically invented in a series of Supreme Court rulings back in the early 1900s called the Insular Cases. And what it did, essentially, was create this whole new category for places that the U.S. controlled, but had no intention of ever making states. And this quote, which comes directly from those court cases, just sums up the legal limbo perfectly. Puerto Rico belongs to, but is not fully part of, the United States. It's a total contradiction, right? The people who live there are U.S. citizens, but the island itself doesn't have the same standing as a state, not even close. So what does that actually mean in the real world? Well, it's simple. If you're a U.S. citizen living in, say, Ohio or California, you can vote for the president. You have senators and representatives in Congress who can actually vote on laws. But if you're a U.S. citizen living in Puerto Rico, you can't vote for president. You have one person in the House of Representatives, and they don't even get a final vote on legislation. That is a huge, huge difference in political power. And, this lack of political power isn't just some abstract idea on paper. No, it has real, tangible effects on the economy and on daily life on the island. So let's take a look at the real price of this status. And here we are, back to this chart from the beginning. Now it starts to make a bit more sense, right? That poverty rate, 43.5%, isn't just high. It's more than double the rate of the poorest U.S. state. It's an outlier that absolutely demands an explanation. And a huge part of that explanation is tied directly to its political status. Here's just one concrete example of how a federal policy can have a massive impact. It's called the Jones Act. It's a law from 1920 that says any goods shipped between U.S. ports have to be on ships that are U.S. built, U.S. owned, and U.S. crewed. Now, for an island like Puerto Rico that imports most of its stuff, this makes the cost of everything, from food to gas to medicine, skyrocket, because they can't use cheaper, more competitive international shipping. And you can really see the consequences when a crisis hits. After Hurricane Maria just devastated the island in 2017, the federal response was widely criticized. It was seen as slower and just not as robust as the responses to disasters that happen on the mainland. The sources we've looked at draw a straight line from these problems back to the island's lack of political clout in Washington. Without any voting senators or representatives, their calls for help just don't carry the same weight. So when you put all of these pieces together, the history, this weird legal limbo, the economic fallout, well, it leads scholars and analysts to use a very specific and pretty loaded word to describe Puerto Rico's situation. And that word is colony. Now, according to the materials from places like National Geographic and Foreign Affairs, Puerto Rico pretty much fits the description. Under international definitions, it doesn't have full self-determination. The U.S. federal government holds the ultimate power, and its residents, even though they're citizens, don't have the same political rights as citizens on the mainland. So within this academic framework, it's seen as America's oldest colony. At the end of the day, what this all really shows is that the decisions made in courtrooms over 100 years ago weren't just some dusty legal footnotes. No, they created a system, a structure that continues to shape the economic reality, the political power, and the future for millions of American citizens today. And that leaves us with this one big lingering question. The United States was founded on these core principles of self-determination and government by the people. So how do you square those principles with overseeing a territory in a status that many define as colonial, and doing it for well over a century? It's a question that's still at the very heart of the unfinished story of Puerto Rico.